from a minimum of being with me for 3 lectures, you know already that I see the chapters as having a lot of common material. One of the things I've been thinking about doing, and I'm not sure right this minute whether I'm going to do it literally or not, is having 2 columns. Let's name all the things that are the same about these 3 chapters. Then what is it that differentiates these 3 chapters? What's different about them? Now, I really at one point planned to write it on the document camera and have it on the screen, but I'm thinking right now of more of a brainstorming kind of, what is it that these 3 chapters share? They share the stages of production. They share the names of the accounts. They share the journal entries. They share the uniqueness of manufacturing overhead. We need to talk a lot today about manufacturing overhead. You need to study a lot about manufacturing overhead. They have as their goal to determine the cost of a good you're producing, and ultimately how to tell other people about that so that we can measure net income, but that's not seemingly the primary focus. It's all the steps leading up to it. Then, how are they different? What's the definitive thing or two that makes them unique? I believe it is how we find the cost of finished goods. If you ask me to say it as simply as I could, it is, how do you find the cost of the goods you finished? Well, in job order, we sum the cost on the job cost sheets. We account for the jobs separately. We figure out which ones we finished. We sum those that we finished and call that finished goods. How do we do that in process costing? There were prescribed steps. Determine the physical units, the equivalent units, determine the unit cost for materials and conversion cost. Use those equivalent units to assign costs to the goods that we finished, there it is, and the goods we didn't. And it's very predictable. And how do you find the cost of the goods finished in a standard cost system? It's my one regret about the way I conducted class last week. Because you had to do it in your homework, I never found an exercise to demonstrate it to you in class, and some people ask out of class, and I should have handled it in class. How do you find the cost of goods finished in a standard cost system? Well, you're supposed to know the standard cost of one unit. That standard cost of one unit times the number of units you produced is the cost of finished goods. That seems to be the biggest thing that's different about 3 chapters. Now, we have to add on to that the 3rd chapter talks about variances, and variances affect the journal entries, but sure, that's a big deal in that chapter. But I think the primary thing that's different is how do you find the cost of goods finished. I'd also like to draw a distinction between what I'm considering to be the obvious and the not so obvious. I think that we've covered the obvious, and we will review some of that today. And I think you need to know the obvious. I've been talking about it a little bit today. I would like to challenge you to begin now, even through this session today and on Monday, and in your individual preparation, to go beyond the obvious and look for the not so obvious. Let me see if I can say it differently. If you were the teacher trying to come up with 35 questions from these 3 chapters, would you be content ask 11 questions about the process cost allocation steps. Now, I'm not sure you assumed the teacher's role there. I think you felt that from the student side, and maybe that was even more effective. Do you want 11 questions on the test about how to make this ho-hum, boring allocation? If you can do it once, couldn't you do it the other 10 times? Why should I ask you over and over and over those same questions? My point is, as you try to come up with questions to make this a 35-question test, let me make that point a second. Y'all want a 25-question test? What's wrong with the 25-question test? Each little mistake hurts worse. Yes? 35 seems to be manageable. We can handle 35 questions. But sometimes when you're searching around looking for something else to ask, it comes from the not so obvious. Do you see my point? It's that, can you apply this to another situation? Can you think through something? It's beyond rote to a little more thinking about apply some common sense or some accounting sense that you've learned and developed and reach a good conclusion based on your knowledge and experience. So, look for the not so obvious. Let's do some stuff. Hope you've got a book with you and are willing to follow along. I think we ought to review the flow of costs through the accounts. That's something that happens in every chapter. You ought to know how to make the journal entries by now. Uses a job order cost accounting system. On May 1st, the company has a balance in work in process of 3,200 and 2 jobs in process. Did we work this in my class?
I don't remember.
Somebody that takes notes, tell me whether we worked this or not.
No.
Did you see it work in Mr. Elliott's class, anybody?
No.
I didn't think so. I looked back, I didn't think so, but it sure sounded familiar when I started reading it just now. During May, a summary of the source documents reveals the following. The left column is about materials requisition slips, the right column is about labor time tickets. I'm trying to just get all the information out and then we're going to go back through it. M Manufacturing applies manufacturing overheads at an overhead rate of 80% of direct labor. Job 429 is completed during the month. Prepare summary journal entries to record. I'm not going to read all that. Post the entries to a work in process account and prove the agreement of the control account with the job cost sheets. So I'm going to depend on you for a second. I'm going to ask you to help me with numbers that I read there. This is the general ledger, and in the general ledger there is an account called work in process. And this is a subsidiary ledger called the cost ledger. And in this, there are individual job cost sheets that have information that we need to know. I said I was going to depend on you, and I am, but I'm going to do some of it on my own. The company has a balance in work in process inventory of $3,200. Do you see where it says that in the opening paragraph? Yes or no? Yes. This is the beginning balance, $3,200, which consists of, the rest of that paragraph says, job 429, 2,000, and job 430, 1,200. Job 429 was $2,000, yes or no? Yes. Did I remember that correctly? Yes. Job 430 has how much in it? I don't remember. Come on, say it. 1,200. And I bet we're going to run across more jobs soon. During May, a summary of the source documents reveals the following. There's one column of information about materials requisition slips. And then there's another column about labor time tickets. And I think it would be more appropriate for us to deal with those two separately. So would you forget that the labor time tickets are even described there? Would you focus only on the portion described as materials requisition slips? And would you talk to me about the journal entry we would need to make to record this summary at the end of the month? We've compiled all this information. We need to make a summary journal entry. We could make it a group project, or one person could jump on this and do the whole thing. May I have a volunteer to help me out? Let me say this differently. I chose this exercise because it might be one of the easier things we're going to do today. And I just spent 10 minutes going over all the things that are the same in these 3 chapters, and this is. And for me to have this many people in the room and not one person willing to help me is a little scary. Does that say to me that you just don't like to volunteer? Or that you don't have a clue on how to make this entry? I don't care whether you like to volunteer or not. You help the whole room and you help yourself tremendously when you volunteer. If I'm measuring this by you don't know what's going on, that's the part that's scaring me. Whit, will you start me out, please?
We're going to debit work in process and credit materials raw materials.
Is correct, Whit. That would be the same entry we'd make in all 3 chapters. Debit work in process and credit raw materials. Whit, let's make this entry for words before we make it for numbers. Are you a willing participant here?
Yes.
Debit work in process for
3,200.
And I could write 3,200 as words, but I typically think of 3,200 as a number. And you agreed to play the word game with me. A word to describe this amount of debit to work in process, Whit?
The amount that we are requisitioning.
The amount that we are requisitioning is true, but I was thinking of one word. It's a review session. And I haven't quite pricked Whit's memory. Or he's at his wit's end. Let's Jake?
Actual?
Actual is one of the appropriate words that I'd settle for. Credit, raw materials, how much? A word, Jake.
Actual?
Actual. Are y'all with me right this minute? Mm-hmm. It's a review. It's 3 weeks that got interrupted with 1 long week that you forgot some stuff. And that's kind of scary because I think I'm having a lifetime influence on you, and if you can't even remember things for a week, maybe I should retire. Give up. Let's make this entry for the other set of words. Debit work in process for a word. Anybody know what I'm fishing for right this minute? Come on, help me out. Pooja.
Direct materials.
It's direct. Direct materials. You can say the whole thing. But we already know this is about materials, so I'd be satisfied to say direct. Now, is direct going to be sufficient looking at the information you were given here? I'm back to you, Whit. You got me off to too good a start for me to leave you alone. Debit work in process, credit raw materials is correct. It's the actual cost that we incurred, Jake says. He's right. We're going to debit this with direct materials. Go ahead and give me that number, Whit.
10,400.
That sounds like too much. I don't know the number, quite frankly. I'm just going to go over here. Ooh, Whit. It is 10,400. Oh, you little thing. I didn't have the confidence to say that. Whit, it's $10,400. How did you pick that number from among all these?
That was the total of materials requisition slips.
The total of the materials requisition slips. I'm not sure that's the total of the materials requisition slips. If it is, I looked at it wrong. The total of the materials requisition slips is $11,200, Whit.
Oh, okay.
So then the question comes, what is the $10,400 you told me?
Direct.
Those are the direct costs we incurred, but what made you reach that conclusion?
The 800 is manufacturing overhead.
The 800 was labeled in the book as, what does it say beside it? I'm away from my book. General factory use?
Yes, the general use.
General use. Not traceable to a specific job. Right, Whit?
Right.
These others have names of jobs out beside them. In fact, so much so that I probably ought to post them right now while I'm thinking about it. Will you help me, Whit? What's the first one say? Job which?
429.
429 got some more materials on it. How much?
$2,500.
$2,500 and more materials went to job 429. Then what happened, Whit?
On 430, we got 3,500.
3,500 went into job 430. Then what happened, Whit?
On 431, we got 4,400.
431, how much?
4,400.
4,400. I regret now putting that little dash beside those because they look like minus signs and they're not. They're just dashes. And that was materials I just posted to that. Materials, 4,400 in job 431. Is that it?
That's it.
The cost that went into specific jobs totaled $10,400. You debited work in process for that number.
Yes.
You said credit raw materials. I say credit raw materials $10,400.
No.
What's the matter?
It doesn't include overhead.
Credit raw materials how much?
11,200.
Is correct. Way to go, Whit. But Whit, I thought debits and credits had to equal.
They do.
They don't.
They will.
When?
Now.
When you
When we debit something else.
debit something else. SOMETHING space capital ELSE, something else. Debit what, Whit?
Manufacturing overhead.
Is correct. Who's with Whit and me right this minute? Whit, let's play the word game. Debit manufacturing overhead, how much? A word
Applied.
is incorrect. A word, Whit,
Actual.
is correct. It wasn't the word I was looking for, but I had to have that word. Debit manufacturing overhead, how much?
800.
That's a number. I'm still looking for a word. You tried to trick me. Whit, you want me to help you?
Applied.
No, you already just got it. Debit work in process, how much, Whit? A word.
I already don't remember.
Pooja.
Direct.
Then debit manufacturing overhead for...
Direct.
No, if it was direct, we'd debit it in the work in process account. The materials that went into the jobs were direct. What's this general factory use one?
Indirect.
Ah, Whit. Debit manufacturing overhead for indirect. Are you with me right this minute?
Yes.
Are you?
Yes.
Are you, class? Hands up. Now say that number, Whit.
800.
$800 is debited to manufacturing overhead, and $1,100, the total, is credited to raw materials. If you've got a question about this entry, you ought to ask me right now. Good. With that good start, we ought to be able to do the next part a little faster. Read the directions. A, prepare summary journal entries to record, 1, the requisition slips, and Whit did. 2, the time tickets. So now it's the same area, it's the same group of material, it's the same where the data is presented. Ignore all the material stuff and concentrate on all the labor stuff described there, and volunteer and be willing to make me an entry. Sam, are you?
Yes, sir.
Here we go.
Debit works in progress.
Works in progress.
Progress. I want to say that.
It's okay. A lot of people do. It's work.
Work in progress.
Work in process. I think work in progress would be a real good name. Go, Sam. Let's go. Here we go.
We're debiting work in process for $12,500, and that's direct. And then crediting factory labor, $13,700.
Debited or credited?
Credit.
Keep going.
And then we have to debit manufacturing overhead for $1,200.
And credit?
Credit factory labor.
Twice?
No. Just once.
I got a little confused. You may have said it all right. Let's just talk about the account titles. Forget amounts. Debit work in process. Debit
Manufacturing overhead.
credit.
Factory labor.
I like it. Debit work in process. Debit manufacturing overhead. Credit factory labor. Let's make this entry for words before we make it for numbers. Debit work in process for
Direct.
debit manufacturing overhead for
Indirect.
credit factory labor for the total. The total. There's no way to describe the sum of these two debits any better than that I can think of. The other word game, put that one aside and start over, is debit work in process,
Actual.
debit manufacturing overhead,
Actual.
credit factory labor, actual. Two actuals make a credit of actual. Yes? Are you with me? Are you with me? Yes? Then let's make this entry for numbers. Debit work in process.
$12,500.
Where did you get that number?
From the labor time tickets.
That is 1,900 plus 3,000 plus 7,600. That is the sum of the direct labor that went into the jobs. Right, Sam?
Correct.
Right, Sam?
Correct. No, it's not.
You think I'm tricking you. You don't trust me.
I will.
It better be.
It should be.
I kind of like his attitude right this minute. Don't take anybody's word for anything. Add it up yourself.
It is.
Good. Sam, will you help me post?
Yes.
I would like to have these labor figures in the 3 job order accounts that we're keeping up with. How much labor went into job 29?
2,500.
How much labor went into job 30?
3,500.
These look just like the materials amounts.
Oh, they are. Because I'm on the wrong
How come I was the first person that caught that?
I'm sorry.
Who saw that mistake? Why were you yelling and screaming? Letting me look at this nasty rag I've got to erase with. It's your fault because you didn't catch me before now. It's not your fault, Sam. We're blaming on somebody else. And that's what life is. Let's do labor.
19.
Labor on 429 was.
1,900.
Labor on 430 was.
3,000.
Labor on 431 is.
7,600.
Do I have the facts right, Sam?
Yes, sir.
Do I, class?
Yes.
Who's with me right this minute? Hands up. Sam. Debit work in process. How much?
12,500.
That sum. You know, I forgot to post Witt's entry to the general ledger. Witt says debit work in process in the general ledger for the materials of $10,400. Right, class? Now, Sam says debit work in process for labor for a total of $12,500. The general ledger has to have the summary information that the details to which are provided in the subsidiary ledger, in the cost ledger. Debit manufacturing overhead, how much?
1,200.
1,200 was described in the problem as
Indirect.
general use. You concluded it was indirect labor. It wasn't traceable to a specific job. It helped out on all the jobs. Yes? Credit factory labor for?
Total 13,000.
The sum of those two is $13,700. If you've got a question right this minute, you ought to ask me. It's the journal entries for the flow of costs through the accounts. We ought to be good at this. We ought to be proficient at this. All 3 chapters are built on this. We ought to be going faster than we're going right this minute. Let's read the instructions. Prepare summary journal entries to record the requisition slips, and we did. The time tickets, and we did. And the assignment of manufacturing overhead to jobs. I need a brand new volunteer. Title to debit and what account title to credit. And all the peripheral stuff that goes with that. Who's willing to talk to me right this minute? Pooja?
You debit work in process and credit manufacturing overhead.
Is correct. Debit work in process and credit manufacturing overhead. How much, Pooja? I'd like a word to describe this number.
Apply.
This is the applied amount. That's one of the reasons that we play the game and hear the word actual come up a time or two. We've used actual 6 times. Give me a synonym to help me relate a little better to applied in this context. Anybody know what I'm fishing for here? This is an estimate. This is an estimated amount. It's different from all the other things. We've got concrete evidence, invoices, and all sorts of other stuff to support all the entries that we've heard made today. This one's an estimate. It's applied. Will you help me find that number? What does it say in the problem?
80% of direct labor costs.
When we apply overhead, we apply it on the basis of the way in which the rate was determined. We're going to say more about this in a little while. Whatever we use to determine the rate also determines the actual thing that we multiply by to get the estimate. So Pooja, 80% was the estimated rate. 80% of what?
Direct labor.
And is that number on the screen here someplace?
Yes.
Which number is it?
12,500.
This number, Sam described as direct labor, didn't he? You don't suppose that's the reason we played that little game a little while ago, do you? Is anybody with me right now? We needed to know where direct labor was, and there it is. Pooja says 80% of that number, how much, Pooja?
$10,000.
$10,000, auditors. $10,000 is the amount we need to apply to production. Could we update the subsidiary ledger while we're at it? I'm going to put $10,000 of overhead in the work in process account. But shouldn't that also be reflected in the subsidiary ledger, Pooja? Mm-hmm. How much overhead belongs on job 29?
1,520.
1,520 you determined how?
I said 80% of 1,900.
1,900, the labor on that job times 80%. What's true of the whole is also true of the parts. 1,900 times 80% is 1,520. I need a new volunteer. Tell me how to get overhead on job 30. Some hand up, please. Stephanie.
You take 80% of 3,000.
3,000, the labor, times the overhead rate of 80% is, Stephanie? Didn't hear you?
2,400.
2,400 is our estimate of overhead on that job. Some new volunteer. Tell me the amount of overhead I should apply to job 431. Where are you? Here he is. Mitch.
6,080.
One more time.
6,080.
6,080, like 6080. Mitch, is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Is he right, class?
That's right.
How'd you get it, Mitch?
80% of 7,600.
7,600 in labor on that job, 80%. Our estimate is when we incur $1 of labor, when we pay our employees $1 in labor, we incur another 80 cents in miscellaneous costs. Depreciation, property taxes, insurance, heating, lighting costs, all those other things that go along with the factory that are difficult to trace and assign to the jobs. Are you with me right now? Would you like to ask a question right now? Anybody? Somebody? Let's read what the problem says. Prepare summary journal entries to record 4. the completion of job 429. Earlier today, I've said these 3 chapters share a lot of common material. They also have something different about them. The distinguishing feature, in my opinion, is how you find the cost of goods finished in job order, process, and standard cost systems. Here's how you do it in job order. You accumulate the cost on the job cost sheets, and then you sum the cost that you've allocated to that job. What if the problem said jobs 429 and 430 were finished? Then we would sum these and sum these and sum these. Ooh, I don't know how effective that was. Did y'all get it?
Yes.
Is that what the problem says?
No.
Jobs 429 and 430 were finished. Yes or no?
Yes.
What does it say? Job 429 was finished. Would you sum these costs for me, please? 2,000, 2,500, 1,900, and 1,520 are, Jeff?
7,920.
7,920 has been suggested. I need an auditor. I need a journal entry to record what the book asked us to just now. Jeff?
Debit finished goods and credit work in process.
Is correct. Thank you. How much, Jeff?
7,920.
It is the amount of this entry that is the distinguishing feature between these 3 chapters. This entry is debit finished goods, credit work in process for 79.20, Jeff says. I think I ought to post to this account 79.20, which makes the balance of this account 0. And to this account, debit finished goods, credit work in process. Well, here's work in process. I need to credit it with 79.20. Would somebody add these debits for me and stop there? Jeff?
36,100.
36,100, is that what I heard you say?
Yes, sir.
Auditors on 36,100?
That's right.
Now subtract 79.20, the credit, from 36,100. Somebody tell me the balance of this account. Sam?
28,180.
28,180. Is that what you said, Sam?
Yes, sir.
It's a lot of stuff, but would you please sum these 2 remaining jobs in process? Tell me this sum, tell me this sum, tell me the sum of the 2. I need 3 numbers from you. Would you add job 430, 1,200, 3,500, 3,000, 2,400, and tell me this number? Somebody that hadn't volunteered yet. The sum of the cost on this job are, Paula?
10,100.
10,100? Could I have an auditor on 10,100?
Correct.
The sum of the cost on job 431 are, a new volunteer, Jonathan?
18,080.
18,080. Did I write what you said, Jonathan? Now would you, class, sum these 2? 18,080 plus 10,100. Tell me the sum of the cost in the subsidiary ledger, the ending work in process, the details. This sum is
28,180.
28,180. Do you see what I see? Who's with me right this minute? We just spent about 30 minutes, a little less than that, on the obvious. Do you remember the talk at the beginning about the obvious and the not so obvious? You were supposed to know everything we just did. I wasn't sure you did. I took the risk of working this too detailed exercise at a review session that was too obvious because I thought we needed to establish that. This is your opportunity to ask me questions about this before we move on to some really, really good stuff. Shane?
That's 7920. Can you say what all that comprises?
It's all the cost on job 429.
Okay, I forgot about the beginning balance. All right, we're good to go.
I'm glad you asked.
Work in process should have a job title too, right? Like the 429.
Work in process, this one?
This here.
Not necessarily, because this is impacting the general ledger. This is a summary entry. This seems like a strange answer to your question, Jake, but I really believe it's the problem. Do you remember just moments ago when we read for the first time that job 429 was finished, and I walked over here and said, pretend that 429 and 430 were both finished? I think it would have been a better problem to say that two were finished. If we had summed the cost on these two jobs and made this entry for that, you wouldn't have wanted to put dash 429 on it. Do you see my point? The only reason you were tempted to do that was because there was just one job. Don't you think we should have finished more than one job? If we had started on two, don't you think we could have finished both of those? And the other thing is, isn't this number kind of small compared to this number? It's just a little flaw in the problem. Did I answer your question? It seems like an odd way to answer it, but I really think that was the crux of the issue. That's why you fell for that temptation. It's a general ledger account, the support to which would be provided from the subsidiary ledger. Jeff, your hand's up.
Never mind.
Please?
No, I'm good.
Okay. What else can we do that would be helpful to you? Let's find some good stuff. Where's my stack? Pardon me for one moment, I'm disoriented. I need to